For 16 years, the trucks came before dawn. The engines would rattle through the silence of the valley, gears grinding on the steep descent, and then the sound of wet, heavy matter spilling onto gravel. Elena Voss would lie in her bed in the old stone farmhouse, listening. She knew the sound by heart now, the slosh, the thud, the hiss of hydraulic lifts, and then the smell would drift through her open window, sharp, acidic, fermenting. Grape skins, grape seeds, stems, the leftovers of someone else's fortune, dumped at the edge of her property, like she was nothing more than a convenient hole in the ground. The first time it happened, she had run outside in her nightgown, barefoot on the cold ground, waving her arms at the driver. He had barely looked at her, just pointed to a faded map on his clipboard, muttered something about an easement from 1987, and climbed back into his cab. The truck pulled away, leaving her standing in the dark with a mountain of purple sludge steaming in the October air. She was 26 years old. She had just buried her mother. She had inherited 12 acres of overgrown vineyard, a farmhouse with a leaking roof, and a bank account that held exactly $417. That was 2008. By 2024, Elena Voss would be standing in a conference room in San Francisco, watching a buyer from Sephora turn a small glass jar of face cream in her hands, examining it under the light like it was a diamond. The label read Voss and Vine. The price point was $89. The purchase order would be for 12,000 units, and the woman who once scraped grape waste off her boots every morning would sign a contract that would change everything. But that morning in 2008, she didn't know any of that. She only knew that she was alone, that the bank was calling about the mortgage, and that there was now 3 tons of rotting Grape Pomace blocking her driveway. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at her mother's old kitchen table, the one with the cigarette burns from decades of late-night worry, and she stared out the window at the pile. In the moonlight, it looked almost beautiful. Purple and black, glistening, her mother's voice came back to her, the way it always did when she didn't want it to. You were always too proud, Elena, too proud to ask for help, too proud to walk away. Pride won't keep the lights on, Mija. Her mother had been a vineyard worker for 40 years. She had picked grapes in 100-degree heat until her hands were stained permanently purple, until her back curved like a question mark. She had saved every dollar she could, and she had bought this land, this worthless, rocky, north-facing plot that no one else wanted, because it was the only piece of earth she could afford to own. She had died 6 months after signing the papers. Elena had quit her job as an administrative assistant in Santa Rosa to come home and figure out what to do with her mother's dream. Now she was sitting in that same kitchen, and the dream was rotting in her front yard. She got up before sunrise. She pulled on her mother's old rubber boots, the ones with the crack in the left sole, and she walked out to the pile. The smell hit her first, sweet and sour at the same time, like wine that had turned to vinegar. She poked it with a stick. The skins were thick and dark, almost black. The seeds were hard and numerous, thousands of them, like tiny beads. She scooped up a handful and let it run through her fingers. It was still warm from the fermentation. She didn't know why she did what she did next. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the way the pomace looked in the morning light, rich and dark like fertile soil. Maybe it was just that she couldn't stand the thought of another person telling her what she couldn't do. She went to the barn and got a wheelbarrow. She started moving the pomace, not away from the house, toward it, toward the old garden her mother had kept behind the kitchen, the one that had gone to weeds. It took her 3 days to move the first truckload. Her shoulders ached, her hands blistered and then calloused. The pomace was heavier than it looked, wet and dense, and it stained everything it touched a deep, stubborn purple. She mixed it into the soil of the garden, turning it under with a shovel that was older than she was. The earth was dry and gray, depleted from years of neglect. The pomace sank into it like water into a sponge. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. What would she say? That she was composting industrial waste because she couldn't afford fertilizer? That she had nothing better to do with her time than shovel someone else's garbage? The neighbors, what few there were on this remote stretch of valley road, watched her from their trucks as they drove past. She could feel their eyes. She could imagine what they were thinking. The Voss girl has lost her mind, just like her mother. Too much sun, too much solitude, too much pride. But 2 weeks later, something happened. The tomato plants she had planted in desperation, using seeds from a packet she'd found in her mother's junk drawer, began to change. They had been spindly and yellow, on the verge of death. Now they were dark green, almost lush. The leaves were broad and waxy, and the tomatoes, small, stubborn, determined, were ripening faster than they should have, their skins tight and glossy, their color deeper than any tomato she had ever seen. She picked one and bit into it standing in the garden, juice running down her chin. It was the best tomato she had ever tasted. Sweet and complex, with a depth of flavor that made her close her eyes. She didn't understand it. She didn't understand any of it. But she knew with the certainty that comes from pure exhaustion and pure hope that she was onto something. The trucks kept coming. Every harvest season from September to November, the winery up the road, a massive corporate operation that produced millions of bottles of mediocre Cabernet, would dump their pomace at her gate. It was cheaper than paying for disposal. It had been going on for years before she inherited the land, a quiet arrangement between the previous owner and the winery's logistics manager. No one had ever questioned it. No one had ever cared. Elena started meeting the trucks. She would be waiting in the dark, her wheelbarrow ready, her boots on. The drivers, always different men, always tired, always surprised to see her, would shrug and dump their loads. She would nod her thanks, as if they were doing her a favor. And then she would work, all day, sometimes into the night, moving the pomace, turning it, studying it. She learned its moods. The fresh pomace, still warm and fragrant, was different from the pomace that had sat for a week, different from the pomace that had begun to dry and crumble. She started separating the components. Skins in one pile, seeds in another, stems in a third. She didn't know why. She just knew that they were different, and that difference meant something. Her hand stayed stained purple for months at a time. She stopped trying to wash it off. It became part of her, like the crack in the boot, like the silence of the valley, like the weight of her mother's absence. She stopped going into town. She stopped answering the phone. The bank sent letters, and she threw them in the wood stove unread. What was the point? She had no money. She had no plan. She had only this strange, obsessive work, this feeling that if she just kept going, if she just kept turning the dirt and studying the waste, something would reveal itself. The second year, she expanded the garden. She cleared a 1/4 acre of brush and weeds, working with hand tools because she couldn't afford a tractor, because the fuel for a tractor would have cost more than she had. She mixed pomace into every square foot of that new ground. She planted zucchini and peppers and eggplant. She planted flowers, marigolds and zinnias and sunflowers, because her mother had loved them, because she needed something beautiful to look at besides purple sludge. Everything grew, everything thrived. The plants were vigorous, almost aggressive in their growth. The flowers were enormous, their colors saturated and unreal. Bees came in swarms, drawn by the sweetness that lingered in the air. Birds nested in the sunflowers. The valley, which had been silent and empty, began to feel alive. But the garden wasn't enough. It was beautiful, it was miraculous, but it didn't pay the mortgage. Elena started selling vegetables at a roadside stand, using an old card table and a cigar box for cash. She made $40 on a good Saturday. The mortgage was $1,100 a month. The math didn't work, and she knew it, and the knowing sat in her stomach like a stone. She was 31 years old, and she had never felt so lost. One afternoon in late October, a woman pulled up to the stand in a silver Volvo. She was wearing yoga pants and expensive sunglasses, and she bought 3 zucchinis and a bouquet of zinnias. As Elena was wrapping the flowers in newspaper, the woman leaned in and sniffed the air. "What is that smell?" she asked. "It's incredible. Like wine, but earthier." Elena looked at her hands, still purple, despite her efforts to scrub them clean that morning. "It's the compost," she said. "Grape Pomace, from the winery up the road." The woman's eyes widened behind her sunglasses. "You're composting with pomace? That's genius. Do you know what's in grape seeds? Resveratrol, polyphenols, antioxidants that people pay a fortune for in skincare. You're basically growing your vegetables in liquid gold." Elena didn't know what resveratrol was. She didn't know what polyphenols were. But she knew the word antioxidant. She had seen it on bottles in drugstores, on creams that cost more than her monthly mortgage. She felt something shift in her chest, a door opening that she hadn't known was there. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman laughed. "Just someone who reads too many beauty blogs. But seriously, have you ever thought about what else you could do with that pomace? Besides compost, I mean?" Elena thought about it that night, sitting at her mother's table, a zucchini bread cooling on the counter. She thought about the seeds, thousands of them, hard and dark, separated into their own pile behind the barn. She had been throwing them away, or feeding them to the birds, or letting them compost on their own. She had never considered that they might be valuable. She went to the library the next day, the first time she had left the property in 3 weeks, and she used the ancient computer in the corner to search. Grape seed oil, grape seed extract, resveratrol. The words swam on the screen, scientific and foreign, but the pictures were clear. Creams, serums, oils, tiny bottles with enormous price tags. She read about cold pressing. She read about extraction methods. She read about the cosmetics industry, a $50 billion machine that sold hope in milliliter doses. She checked out every book the library had on soap making, on essential oils, on natural cosmetics. She maxed out her card. She read them by candlelight because she couldn't afford to keep the electricity on past 9 o'clock. She made her first batch of soap in an old stock pot on the wood stove. Using rendered fat from a neighbor's pig and a handful of grape seeds she had ground into paste with a mortar and pestle. It was ugly, gray and lumpy, with visible bits of seed hull, and it smelled like barnyard and fermentation. But she washed her hands with it, and her skin felt different afterward, softer, tighter, alive. She made another batch, and another. She experimented with different oils. Olive oil from a farm down the valley, coconut oil she ordered with money she didn't have, sweet almond oil she found at a discount store in Santa Rosa. She learned about saponification, about superfatting, about the delicate chemistry of turning fat and lye into something clean and nourishing. She burned herself twice. She ruined 4 batches, pouring them down the drain in tears. But the fifth batch was different. It was the color of pale amber, translucent and glowing. The grape seeds had been ground so fine they disappeared into the oil, leaving only a faint speckling like vanilla bean. The smell was subtle, wine-like but clean, with notes of something green and growing. She washed her face with it that night, standing at the kitchen sink, looking at her reflection in the dark window. She was 32 years old, and she looked older. The sun had etched lines around her eyes. Her skin was dry from wind and work and worry, but the next morning she touched her face in the mirror and felt something she hadn't felt in years: softness, elasticity. a glow that wasn't just the dawn light. She started giving the soap to the women who stopped at her vegetable stand. She wrapped it in brown paper and twine, the way she had seen fancy soaps wrapped in magazines at the dentist's office. She didn't charge for it at first. She just gave it away, watching their faces as they smelled it, as they turned it over in their hands. "This is beautiful," they said. "This smells like a spa. What did you say was in this?" By the third year, she had a small following. Women would drive from Santa Rosa, from Healdsburg, from as far as San Francisco, to buy her vegetables and her soap. They would stand at her card table in the dust of the roadside, talking for 20 minutes about their skin, about their allergies to commercial products, about their desire for something real, something made by human hands. Elena listened. She learned. She started making lotion, using grapeseed oil as a base, whipping it with shea butter and beeswax until it was light as air. She made lip balm. She made bath salts infused with dried grape skins. She was still poor, desperately, achingly poor, but she was no longer invisible. The winery never stopped dumping the pomace. If anything, they dumped more of it as their operation expanded. Elena stopped seeing it as an insult. She started seeing it as a delivery. Raw materials brought to her door. She built a shed behind the barn, a ramshackle structure of salvaged wood and corrugated metal, and she turned it into a workshop. She bought a used oil press from a bankrupt almond farm, paying for it in installments of soap and vegetables. She learned to cold press grape seeds, the slow, patient process of squeezing oil from something that looked like nothing. The first pressing produced a few ounces of dark, fragrant oil. She bottled it in amber glass jars she ordered from a surplus website. She called it Valley Gold because that's what it looked like in the sunlight, and because that's what it had become to her. She was 35 when she got her first real break. A food blogger from San Francisco, a woman with 200,000 Instagram followers, and a weakness for farm stands, stopped at Elena's table on a Sunday in September. She bought soap, lotion, a jar of oil. She took pictures of the purple-stained hands that handed her the brown paper bag. She posted them that night with a caption that read, "Found the most incredible farm in Sonoma. This woman makes skincare from grape waste. Her hands are permanently purple from working with pomace. Her products are magic. More soon." The post got 14,000 likes. Elena's phone, a cracked iPhone 5 she had bought used, started ringing and didn't stop. Orders poured in through a website she had barely figured out how to maintain. She worked 20-hour days, pressing oil, mixing lotion, wrapping soap, answering emails with thumbs that were raw and purple. She hired her first employee, a teenager from the nearest town who didn't mind the smell of fermentation and was good with numbers. She hired a second. She outgrew the shed and built a bigger one. She still couldn't afford to heat it. So they all wore fingerless gloves and scarves, working in the cold, their breath visible, their hands stained, their hearts full. The bank stopped sending letters. The mortgage got paid. The roof got fixed. Elena bought her mother a headstone, simple granite, with a grapevine carved into the surface, and she placed it on the hill above the farmhouse, where the morning sun hit first. She would visit it sometimes, carrying a cup of coffee, sitting in the grass with the valley spread below her. "I did it, Mama," she would say. "I don't know how, but I did it." The wind would move through the grapevines she had finally planted on the rocky slopes, the ones her mother had dreamed of, and it sounded almost like an answer. But the real turning point came when she was 38. A woman named Patricia walked into her workshop unannounced, wearing a blazer that cost more than Elena's first car, carrying a leather portfolio that smelled like money. She was a buyer for Sephora, she said. She had heard about the grapeseed oil, about the story, about the woman with purple hands who turned waste into beauty. She wanted to see it for herself. Elena showed her everything: the press, the mixing room, the shelves of amber jars catching the afternoon light. She showed her the compost piles, the ones that had started it all, now steaming gently in the cool air. She showed her the garden, still growing, still thriving, the tomatoes still the best in the valley. Patricia Chen didn't say much. She took notes. She asked questions about production capacity, about ingredient sourcing, about pricing. She examined a jar of Valley Gold under the light, turning it, watching the way the oil moved, thick and golden. "This is cold-pressed?" she asked. "Yes," Elena said. "No heat, no chemicals, just pressure and time." "And the Resveratrol content?" Elena pulled out a folder, organized now, professional, with lab results she had paid for with money she could finally spare. Higher than any commercial grape seed oil on the market. "The pomace we use is from a specific harvest window, when the antioxidant concentration peaks. We've tested it." Consistently, Patricia Chen looked at her for a long moment. Elena saw something in her eyes, not pity, not curiosity, but recognition. The look of one woman who had fought for everything she had, seeing another woman who had done the same. "I'll be honest," Patricia said. "Sephora gets 100 pitches a week from artisan brands. Most of them are nonsense. Fancy packaging, mediocre product, no story. But you have the story. You have the product. And you have something else." She gestured at Elena's hands. "Still purple after all these years, the stain permanent now, embedded in the creases and lines. You have proof. No marketing team in the world can fake that." They talked for 3 hours. They talked about minimum orders and lead times and packaging standards. They talked about Elena's vision, about where she wanted to take the brand, about the line of products she dreamed of creating, not just oil and soap, but serums, moisturizers, masks, a full skincare system built around the chemistry of grapes. Patricia Chen listened, and she nodded, and she made notes, and when she left, she shook Elena's hand with both of hers and said, "I'll be in touch." Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat at her mother's table, now refinished and beautiful, and she looked out at the valley where the trucks still came, where the pomace still piled up, where everything had started. She thought about the girl she had been at 26, standing in her nightgown in the dark, waving her arms at a truck driver who didn't care. She thought about the years of blisters and calluses and purple hands and cold mornings and empty bank accounts. She thought about the garden, the first tomato, the first bar of soap, the first customer who looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. 2 weeks later, the email came. It was formal, full of legal language and purchase order numbers, but the meaning was clear. Sephora wanted to carry Voss and Vine. They wanted 12,000 units to start, with options for expansion. They wanted exclusivity on the grape seed line for 18 months. They wanted Elena Voss to fly to San Francisco and sign the contract in person. She wore a dress she had bought for the occasion, simple and black, the first new clothes she had owned in years. She took a car service because she was too nervous to drive, too afraid she would get lost or late, or somehow ruin the moment before it began. The Sephora offices were in a glass tower downtown, all chrome and light and people in expensive shoes clicking across marble floors. Elena felt her mother's boots on her feet. Phantom sensations, the crack in the soul that had let in water and mud, and the reality of hard work. Patricia Chen met her in the lobby. She didn't shake her hand. She hugged her. "You ready?" she asked. Elena looked at her reflection in the glass walls of the conference room. She saw a woman with purple hands and sun-weathered skin and lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and stubborn hope. She saw someone who had turned garbage into gold, who had taken what the world threw at her and made it beautiful. She saw her mother's daughter. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." The contract was thick, bound in leather, full of clauses and contingencies. Elena read every word. She had learned to read contracts the hard way, through years of dealing with suppliers and landlords and the winery that still dumped pomace at her gate. She signed her name at the bottom, the pen heavy in her purple-stained fingers, and when she looked up, Patricia Chen was smiling. "Welcome to Sephora, Elena. Your life is about to change." And it did. Not overnight. Nothing in Elena's life had ever happened overnight, but steadily, surely. The way good things happen when you've laid the groundwork with years of patient, obsessive work. The first shipment of Voss and Vine products arrived in Sephora stores in March, displayed on shelves between brands with billion-dollar marketing budgets and celebrity endorsements. The packaging was simple: amber glass, brown labels, a drawing of a grapevine that Elena had sketched herself. But it stood out. It looked real in a sea of plastic perfection. The reviews started coming in. Bloggers wrote about the FarmToFace movement. Magazines called Elena the Grape Seed Queen. Customers posted pictures of their purple-tinged palms after using the oil, a temporary stain that became a badge of honor, proof of authenticity. The story spread. The woman who took what the world discarded and made it precious. The 16 years of pomace and patience. The hands that never stopped working. Elena was 42 when she bought the winery. Not the whole corporation. She didn't have that kind of money, and she didn't want it. But the specific facility that had dumped on her land for all those years. She bought it for the price of its debt, a transaction that made the old owners shake their heads in disbelief. The same logistics manager who had pointed to his clipboard and ignored her in 2008 was still there, older now, balding, his hands shaking as he handed her the keys. "You won," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an accusation. Elena looked at the massive tanks, the conveyor belts, the industrial machinery that had produced millions of bottles of mediocre wine. She looked at the loading dock where the trucks had backed up for 16 years, dumping their loads onto her property, onto her life. She thought about all the mornings she had woken to the sound of engines, all the nights she had worked until her body ached, all the times she had wanted to give up and walk away. "I didn't win," she said. "I just didn't stop." She converted the winery into a processing facility, not for wine. She had no interest in wine, but for pomace. She built a state-of-the-art cold press operation, the kind she had dreamed of during those years of hand grinding and makeshift equipment. She hired chemists and engineers, and the teenagers from the nearest town who had grown up watching her work. She created a closed-loop system where every part of the grape was used: skins for compost, seeds for oil, stems for mulch, even the residual liquid for natural dyes. Nothing wasted, nothing discarded. Everything transformed. The facility employed 47 people. The valley, which had been dying as corporate agriculture moved elsewhere, began to thrive. Other farmers started bringing their waste: almond hulls, olive pits, citrus peels, and Elena helped them figure out how to turn it into something valuable. She became known as the woman who saw treasure where others saw trash, who believed that the most beautiful things could grow from the darkest beginnings. She was 45 when she stood on the stage at a cosmetics industry conference in New York, accepting an award for innovation in sustainable beauty. She wore a black dress, simple, the same style she had worn to sign the Sephora contract. Her hands were still purple, though she had learned to wear gloves during public appearances. She kept them visible on the podium, resting on the wood, letting the lights catch the stains that had become her signature. "I want to tell you about my mother," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the 1,000 faces watching her. She worked in vineyards for 40 years. She picked grapes in heat that would make you dizzy, in cold that would make your fingers numb. She saved every dollar she could, and she bought a piece of land that no one else wanted. She died 6 months later. And I spent years being angry about that. Angry that she worked so hard for so little. Angry that the world treated her like she was disposable, like her labor didn't matter, like she was just another pair of hands. She paused, looking out at the audience, at the executives and entrepreneurs and influencers who had paid thousands to be in this room. But I was wrong. My mother wasn't disposable. Her labor mattered, and the land she bought, that worthless piece of earth, became the foundation of everything I built. For 16 years, a winery dumped their waste at my gate. They saw it as garbage. I saw it as possibility. And that possibility became Voss and Vine, became 47 jobs, became a reminder that what the world throws away, we can choose to reclaim. She held up her hands, purple and strong, the hands of a woman who had shoveled tons of rotting grapes in the dark. These stains don't wash off. I've tried. For years, I was ashamed of them. I hid them in photographs. I wore gloves to meetings. I apologized for the way they looked. But I'm done apologizing. These stains are my resume. They are proof of work. They are proof that I didn't just talk about sustainability. I lived it. I breathed it. I shoveled it in wheelbarrows before dawn. Every bottle of oil we sell, every jar of cream, every bar of soap, it carries a piece of this purple. It carries a piece of my mother's dream. It carries a piece of every morning I wanted to quit and didn't. The audience was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole room, rising to their feet. The sound filling the space like the engines of trucks in the dark, like the rustle of grapevines in the wind, like the voice of a woman who had finally, after all these years, found the words to say what she had always known. Elena flew home that night, back to the valley, back to the farmhouse with the refinished table and the garden that still grew. The trucks didn't come anymore. She processed the pomace at the facility now, before it ever reached her gate. But sometimes in the early morning she would wake and lie in bed, listening for the sound that wasn't there anymore. The rattle of engines, the grind of gears, the wet, heavy spill of possibility onto gravel. She would get up and make coffee and walk out to the garden, where the tomatoes still grew, where the flowers still bloomed, where the compost piles steamed gently in the cool air. She would touch the soil, dark and rich and alive. And she would remember the girl she had been, standing in her nightgown in the dark, waving her arms at a world that didn't see her. The world saw her now. The world knew her name. But the garden was still her favorite place, the soil still her truest companion, the purple stains on her hands still the most honest thing about her. She was 50 years old when she found the letter. It was in a box of her mother's things, buried under old photographs and vineyard maps and the deed to the land. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting shaky, written in the last months of her mother's life when the cancer had already started its work. Mija, it read, I know you are angry that I bought this land. I know you think I wasted my savings on rocks and weeds. But I saw something in this valley. I saw a place where things could grow. Not just grapes, dreams, hope, a different kind of life than the one I lived. I couldn't build it myself. I ran out of time. But you, Elena, you have time. You have strength I never had. You have pride, yes, too much pride, always. But pride can be a foundation if you let it. Don't let them tell you what this land is worth. Don't let them tell you what you are worth. Build something. Grow something. Make something beautiful from whatever they give you, even if all they give you is garbage. Elena read the letter sitting at the kitchen table, the same table with the cigarette burns, now covered with a cloth her mother would have loved. She read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket, over her heart, where she could feel it when she breathed. Outside, the valley stretched green and gold in the afternoon light. The facility hummed in the distance, pressing oil, transforming waste, creating jobs. The garden rustled with life, and somewhere, A truck was backing up to a loading dock, spilling pomace that would become something precious, something wanted, something that proved, once and for all, that nothing is ever truly wasted if someone is willing to see its worth. Elena Voss stood up. She pulled on her boots. New boots now, no cracks. But she kept the old ones on a shelf where she could see them, and she walked out into the light. Her hands were purple. Her heart was full, and the world, which had once dumped its garbage at her gate, was waiting to see what she would make of it next.